Hi guys, today we're going to be talking about pansies and violas. I'm going to give you as many tips as I can for growing them. They're both cool season flowers. Their names are used a lot of times interchangeably. I do it. A lot of times I call violas pansies. They are closely related, but there are some differences between the two. So pansies are actually descendants of violas. Pansies were created in England in the 1800s. And this was done by crossing various species of viola. Violas usually have much smaller blooms than pansies do. One single viola plant produces a lot more blooms than a pansy plant. Pansies usually have the bigger, showier, eye-catching blooms that are just really beautiful, but violas beat them in the sheer number of blooms. Both are cool season flowers. They grow best in cooler weather. For a lot of people, that's spring and fall. Pansies and violas might actually grow best in the wintertime. I'm not sure about that. If you live in, say, Texas, Florida, Georgia, let me know if you grow your pansies in the wintertime. I'm in southern Ohio, zone 6. Pansies grow best here in the spring and in the fall. Although they both tolerate cooler temperatures, violas do it better. I've tried to grow both pansies and violas through the winter. I've had really good luck with the violas and a small amount of luck with the pansies. I have gotten some of them to overwinter, but a lot of them die, while the violas make it through the winter with very little problems. I lose very few of them. This pot of violas here is a really good example. I planted these out here in this pot last spring. In this pot was a mix of King Henry violas and also some pansies. The vast majority of the violas made it through the spring and into the summer. A lot of the pansies made it into the summer and into the fall. Same for the violas. Once the cold really set in, the violas were still alive and most of the pansies died. One pansy plant did make it through the winter in this pot, but as you can see, the violas tend to be much more cold tolerant. The violas were green all through the winter. They didn't look good by any means, but they did produce some flowers all winter long, not very many, but they survived. Here I have the offspring of a couple of viola and pansies that crossed, then produced seed. They were seeded. So you could buy violas and pansies in the spring as bedding plants. You see them a lot of times at garden centers. A lot of people plant them and then they let them die off in the summer. They fizzle out, but you can keep them alive all through the summer. If it isn't too hot where you live in the summer, it gets pretty hot here. I'm in zone 6. The care that I put into my pansies and violas determines if they will make it through the summer or not. Last year I was able to keep some living all summer long. Simply plant them in a pot that you can move into the shade later in the summer, or in an area of the garden that gets a lot of afternoon shade, maybe an area that gets dappled sunlight, and make sure you give them plenty of water. The violas and pansies that I had grown in a pot all summer long, I was watering them 2 to 3 times a day in the heat of July. That's the only reason that they made it all the way through the summer. Now, if you live in a cooler climate, you might not have to water them as much as I did. And if you live in a warmer climate than I do, you might not even be able to keep them going. They can look really rough during the summer, but they will make a comeback in the fall or late summer and start blooming like crazy. I find that it's worth the effort, especially when it's flowers that I've already put a lot of work into by growing from seed in the first place. As your pansies are flowering, you can go through and start cutting down the flowers that are starting to fade back and not looking as good as they did a few weeks before. With violas, there are so many flowers. I'm not going to go through and cut off each individual flower. Once I start to see a lot of the violas setting seed, it's starting to warm up outside, is I just grab them by big handfuls like this and I just cut them off. These flowers don't actually need cut back right now, but I'm going to do it anyway for the purpose of this video. It's not a big deal. They will sprout up new flowers and bloom. And this is what a seed pod looks like. If you're curious, basically the petals fall off the flower. You're left with the stem and there's a little seed pod here in the middle. The seed pod will open up on its own and the seeds will disperse. Cutting them back before they start setting a whole bunch of seed is going to encourage new flowers to shoot up and prevent your plants from wasting a bunch of energy on producing seeds. Alright, so let's move on to seed sowing. There's a couple of different ways to grow these from seed. If you're growing an expensive variety, you paid $3 or $4 for a pack of seeds and there's only 10 seeds in the whole pack, I would definitely start those under grow lights. What I like to do is start with a nice moist potting mix. And what I do is I just surface sow the seeds. They're teeny tiny seeds. I don't want them getting really deep down, lost in the soil. But they do like darkness to germinate. So I just cover them up with another seed tray and then bring them indoors and keep them out of any direct sunlight. Check on them every day to make sure that the potting mix hasn't dried out. I usually just use a spray bottle on these teeny tiny seeds like this to keep the soil moist. You don't want to let the seeds dry out during germination. They could die very easily. That goes for any seeds. They need moisture to germinate. Once about half of the seeds have sprouted, I remove the cover and get them under my grow lights. The rest of the seeds that are going to germinate, they're following shortly behind. You don't have to worry about them being in the dark. They should come up. You can also winter sow pansies and violas. If you do this, be sure to cover the seeds with some soil. Since they will be outdoors in the sunlight, you want to make sure they get some darkness, so just cover them up with a little bit of soil. Don't plant them too deep because they are tiny, tiny seeds. I'm going to post a link to a more detailed video on growing pansies under grow lights. I will also post a link on a video to winter sowing. It's not a video that specifically applies to pansies, it's just a general winter sowing video. Now, the old-fashioned violas like Johnny Jump Ups, King Henry Viola are really great candidates for direct sowing in the garden. I do it in the late summer or the early fall. You just plant them out in an area in your garden that has loose, very well-draining soil. They'll sprout up when they're ready and they'll grow very slowly through the winter. After spring rolls around, they'll start blooming like crazy. I'm not 100% sure on what growing zones this will work in, but I can say that you can direct sow viola seeds out in the garden in my area, Zone 6, Southern Ohio. If I was in Zone 5, I would definitely give it a try. If you're in Zone 5 and you grow violas that way, let me know. I've had a little bit of luck growing pansies this way, but they're just not as hardy as violas. If you live in a warmer climate, you might be okay to grow pansies this way. If you've tried it, let me know how it worked out for you. As far as fertilizing pansies and violas, I just use a general all-purpose granular fertilizer. I use whatever I already have on hand. It's usually, a 4-5-4 for a 5-6-4, something in that range. Works good for me. I'll fertilize them in the spring, then I might fertilize them again. Once I cut the flowers back, I might do it 2 times a year, maybe 3. And I think that's just about all for this video. If you have any pansy growing tips, share them down in the comments. Hopefully there was something helpful in this video for you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.